Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Before we listen to Roger, let's go around and say our names as a way of introducing ourselves. My name is John.
Doug.
David. Martin. Fernando. Paul. Joe. George.
Michael.
Lee.
Richard.
Peter. Adrian.
Snake.
Cliff.
Brian.
Ten. Cliff. Jim.
Bob. Harb.
Okay.
Steve.
Daniel.
Marlo. Andrew. Howard. Lasal.
Bill. Today's speaker is Roger Corless. I think most of us know. Roger, I'll microphone over to you. You're on.
Oh, I see. I thought you were going to give a long introduction. But you say, everyone knows me. Yes. So I'm well known.
Well, maybe you can give like a two...
Pardon?
Maybe you can give like a two-sentence introduction.
Two-sentence introduction. I'm English, but I came to the U.S. and became American. And I've been interested in religion in general since I was in my teens, since I was a teenager, and the interests fairly quickly focused on Eastern religions. I thought the Christian tradition was just no good, and I focused on the Eastern tradition, and especially in Buddhism. And then later in life I came back to the Christian tradition and found there were a lot of riches in there that I hadn't noticed because I had just taken what I was told as a kid. And we tell children strangest things about their religion. We tend to use them, I think, for control more than anything else, and we don't introduce them to the magic that is there. And then I managed to go ahead and use this as a way to make some money by getting a PhD in Buddhist studies and then teaching it at a place back east. People don't seem to know any of the universities back east. It was called Duke. They play basketball a lot. You know the Blue Devils? Those are those. That's the one you know. Actually, I've just started to teach Thursday evenings in the continuing studies at Stanford, and people are really impressed. I'm teaching at Stanford. I say, well, I taught at Duke for 30 years. Ah, yeah. But that's all the way back east. So. Anyhow, I also have been associated with a GBF since quite a long time, since before I lived here. I've now moved to the Bay Area, and I have helped out in various ways. At the moment, I have an occasional, more or less every issue now, contribution called Ask Dharma Daddy. So you can call me Daddy if you want, you see. It's up to you. You don't have to. So when I'm asked to come and give these talks, the topic is left open, but talking to Clint, he said, how about something about Buddhism in daily life? And an obvious way of looking at this is something that probably some of you have heard about. Maybe I've even spoken about it before here. I think I have. But it's always good to go over it again, and every time I think of it, it's something fresh. The heart of the Buddhist practice is the Eightfold Path, But then that's a lot to remember. 8's a lot to remember, and I frankly keep forgetting what the 8 are. I've tried to remember them more than once, and you'd think that with a PhD in Buddhist studies I would know, but I can't. I just think no, I can't quite get them. I found it easier to remember them in the Pali than in the English, because there's so many different translations of English. But then it's faded away again. But, however, it happens that there's also the threefold practice. The Trishiksha, or the Tisikka. I know there are some people here today who are more familiar with Pali, though when I was doing a PhD we used Sanskrit as being like the pan-Buddhist language, although nobody actually uses it, but it's sort of it kind of lurks at the back of the Buddhist texts. The Tisikka or the Trishiksha, the triple training. Do we have anybody who wants to have the Chinese? Sanshui, also called Sangaku in Japanese. Anybody does Japanese? I mean, in San Francisco you're liable to get these sorts of people. So, in the Chinese translation, it's more like the 3 learnings or 3 know-hows, and it summarizes the Eightfold Path, and it summarizes the Buddhist practice, and it's easy to remember, I think. Unfortunately, we don't have a standard English translation. The Buddhist tradition is still not more than maybe 100 years old, maybe 150 in the English-speaking world, and it took the Chinese 400 years before they came up with a set of equivalents in Chinese that they felt were as accurate as they could get. Otherwise, before that, they were using translations that were misleading and made it seem like Taoism. So I have to give you the terms first in the Sanskrit or the Pali. My students at that university back east were always extremely annoyed that I would use all these odd terms in strange languages. And I said, well, the Buddha didn't speak English. He would have done if he could, but it hadn't been invented yet, so he couldn't do it yet. So we have to go with the Sanskrit or the Pali and then try to put it into English. So they're called Shila, spelled S-H-I-L-A, which in the Sanskrit sounds like a woman's name. The Pali is slightly different. Sila, and I translate that as conduct. Sometimes it's called ethics, but that's too narrow, I think. The next is samadhi, which is the same in Sanskrit and Pali, which is translated normally as meditation. But meditation is such a vague word. I like to say mind training. It's an interpretive translation. Literally, it means to concentrate the mind. And then the last is prajna in the Sanskrit, or panya in the Pali, which is normally translated as wisdom, which will kind of do insight or study, is another way of putting it. So, Sila, Samadhi, Prajna, Sila, Samadhi, Panya, conduct, mind training, and wisdom or study. I'm going to deal with them in a slightly different order. I start off with conduct, and then I'll go to study or wisdom, and then I'll finish up with the meditation one. This really annoys people when they come to study Buddhism in the West. When a Westerner comes to study Buddhism, they want to start off with meditation and be enlightened by next Thursday. They do not want to be told that conduct in the world and moral action is the foundation of the Buddhist practice and the easiest thing to do, because it's about control of the body and the speech, not necessarily of the mind. That's the control of the mind is in the Buddhist tradition, of course, but at the level of everyday conduct, we're talking of control of, or the purifying of, or in some of the traditions, some of the Tantric or the Mahayana traditions, of the allowing of the pure action to show itself. And I think, well, I've heard all these things. As a child, I was told not to do that, don't do this and don't do the other, and they were all the nice things, especially sex. That was in there. You couldn't do that. You're not supposed to do that, and no alcohol and no meat if you're in the Chinese tradition, and all these lists of things that you shouldn't do. And I don't want any of that. I want to meditate. Let's see if we can't be a bit more sophisticated about this. It's probably helpful to start off by thinking that most of the things we were told about in regard to religion as children were lies. Certainly if we're gay, we were told a lot of things about religion which were simply made up in order to make us feel bad so that we would do what we were supposed to do according to our mothers and fathers or society or whatever. Since we have probably abandoned our big books that said see, spot, run and so forth, and gone on to more sophisticated books that don't even have pictures perhaps, we probably could say, cannot we go on also in religion, in our spiritual life, and look at such a thing as the precepts of conduct. Now, I have had a whole article in the GBF newsletter in regard to sex. It was one of the more popular ones. It always gets people's attention, I think. I would always find when the students were drifting off, I'd just say the word sex, and they were all about 18 years old, so immediately they would start getting interested. And in the latest issue of the newsletter, I have a response to a questionnaire in regard to use of alcohol and drugs. And actually, I know the person who asked the question, and he told me that when he told his friend about the answer I'd given, he said, that's what I don't like about organized religion. They always tell you not to do things and absolutely not do this, that, and the other. And so I just like to pick and choose things. I think that this person may have misunderstood the intent of all of these. The intent of the Buddhist precepts in regard to conduct is not that there should be arbitrary lists coming which are to make you feel bad or to control you. It's better to think of them more as recommendations from a physician or therapist. In fact, the Buddha is sometimes called Bhaisajja Guru, or the master physician. That when we start the practice of Buddhism, we're not really asked, do you believe in the Buddha, or even do you believe in the Four Noble Truths, really. But what Buddhism does is ask us, how are you feeling? And, well, I'm okay. Are you as okay as that? Well, I'm not as okay as I might be. All right, well, then we start there. And now, why aren't you as okay as you might be? We should be really okay. I mean, the natural condition of the mind is blissful and clear and wise and compassionate. And we are taught in Buddhism that the natural condition of the mind is also omniscient. So I don't feel quite like that. What's wrong? Okay, well, something is wrong with your approach or your mind, just in the way as if you have a cold and you say, are you able to breathe? No, I can't breathe well. Well, then there's something wrong with your nose. because a nose is designed so that you can breathe. And we have to see what's wrong and see if we can do something about that. So the similar thing with the precepts in regard to conduct. It is proposed that we are not as peaceful and blissful as we could be because we're acting unskillfully. Not even, I would say, not that we act in a wrong or evil way. Those are very loaded terms, but in an unskillful kind of way. Rather like if I'm trying to wipe a knife, I'm cleaning a knife and I cut myself. And I say, whenever I clean a knife, I cut myself. And someone says, well, you should hold the sharp edge away from you. Oh, yes, skillful. See, you know what a knife is all about and which way around to do it, and then you won't cut yourself. So it's not an arbitrary command, don't hold the knife that way, but if you hold the knife the other way, you won't harm yourself. So we're acting unskillfully. Largely, we are acting to protect what we believe is our most valuable possession, which we think is our immortal and unchanging essence of me. And I'm the most important person in the world, yes? You've realized that, yes? Yeah, you probably think you're the most important person of the world. When we're on the road, when we're driving on the road, we realize that a lot of people out there don't realize how important it is, how important I am, and how I must get at the head of the queue. They think they're important. When we're all thinking we're important like that, we cause each other suffering. So the main intent of conduct, which is normally said to be 5, is non-harming or letting go. And maybe it's all in there if we look at it long enough. The precepts are not to harm, not to take what is not offered, not to misuse sexuality, which is understood differently in different traditions, not to lie or slander or backbite, to misuse the speech, and not to consume alcohol or any other beverages that confuse the mind. The idea being that we're confused enough, we don't want anything more than that. But it all comes down to the first precept, which is non-harming, and the harming is something we do unskillfully because we feel that we need to protect ourselves by destroying somebody else or some other thing. That the suffering I have is caused by this other person, place, or thing, and if I can destroy that, then I will gain to happiness. The teaching is that actually that's the opposite way around to doing things, that when we do that kind of thing, it springs back on us and we get more problems than we started with. That when I harm others. This is pretty obvious on a superficial level, that if I hit someone, they're liable to try to hit me back. And so if I could find some way to relieve the tension, if I have an argument with someone, if I have a problem with someone, if I could negotiate and try to see why they're having the problem, and if they could also see that I'm having the problem, it has to be two-way to make it work right, then I wouldn't have to hit them, and we'd end up with a better situation. The Dhammapada starts off. The Dhammapada is a series of sayings attributed to the Buddha, which exists in the Pali with a rather similar version in the Tibetan and a quite distinctively different version in the Chinese called the Fa Jiu Jing. But they're all related to each other. They're sayings of the Buddha which are unfortunately printed out, given out of context. You have to have the full commentary to find what's going on. But even without the context, a lot of it makes sense. And it starts off by saying, by hate. Hate is not destroyed. Only by love is hate destroyed. That's pretty obvious when we think about it, although it does mean, it does sound a bit simplistic perhaps, that if we love everybody, then everybody will love us. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say if I love everybody, everybody will love me. It says that if I put out a hate, more hate will come back to me. But if I put out love, it's more probable that hate will be diminished. This needs to be balanced with the wisdom, which is which is the third aspect of the triple training. Love without wisdom can sometimes be harmful, whereas wisdom without love can also be harmful. It's sometimes difficult to practice this non-harming on other individuals because we have a lot of built-in reactions, and as soon as we start talking to someone, maybe we get into a space which we didn't intend to. So it's actually a very good way to begin practicing non-harming is on inanimate objects, such as a door. How do you close a door? Can you close a door mindfully and lovingly? When you are just taking a shower or opening a faucet or looking in the fridge, whatever you're doing or walking around, can you perform the action in a mindful and loving kind of way? Now, the door is not really going to mind whether you open it mindfully, close it mindfully, or you slam the door. I mean, it's an inanimate object, and there's no teaching in Buddhism that says the door is alive. There are some traditions which say that, but that's not the Buddhist tradition. However, it's good practice. If I slam doors because I'm angry with them, I might also try to slam people. But if I can practice on inanimate objects, maybe I develop an attitude towards the world which is more peaceful and accepting and loving. And then when I meet an individual, a living being, it's more likely that I can act in an appropriately compassionate and mindful way. So that really is the foundation of the whole thing. And in fact, if you look at that hard enough, you can find the other two practices are enclosed in the practice of right conduct. The practice of wisdom or study, which I'm just about to come to, is there because you are practicing your conduct because you have learned something about the nature of reality, and you are also practicing it in a mindful way, which is a kind of meditation or mind training. So the other two practices are enclosed in the first one, and of course the other two are enclosed in the other two. I mean, everything in Buddhism is interdependent. Not only in Buddhism, actually in life. Some people would think that it's only in Buddhism that things are interconnected, but in other traditions they're all separate. That's pretty strange. There really isn't. In a sense, there's no such thing as Buddhism. Buddhism is a made-up word. It's in English. Did you notice it was in English? Some people don't notice that they're speaking English because it's just their native language and it's very natural to them. The word Buddhism was made up in English. We like isms. Hinduism, and that's another made-up word. We don't have Islamism, although some Duke students had that in their papers. Christianity for some reason, it isn't an ism except in French. It's an ity otherwise. But we like isms, so then we think it's a different kind of thing. But its own word for itself, or one of its own words, is the dharma, or dhamma, meaning the truth. And it's about the way that reality is. So there really isn't any Buddhism. There's the truth about reality. And that's what we're learning, or we're trying to get insight into, in the practice of wisdom, prajna or panya. It's helpful to take the word apart. Jñā is the same, comes from the same root as the English word know. We used to say to know, we used to say in English. But then the French came and they couldn't say that. And when the French took over the English, they really messed up our language. English sounds more like French now than like German, which it should be more. It's closer to in many ways. So to know, to have the gnosis or the gnosis, or to jñā, that's where we get the knowledge or the knowledge, you see. And then the pra is an intensifier. So it's intensely or really knowing or understanding. And this you get by listening to talks by people who know something about the Dharma, also by reading books. We live in a culture where books are everywhere, even despite the TV. I've heard people say, well, now we've got the TV, nobody will read books anymore. And then we got Barnes and Noble and Borders, and someone must be reading all those books. Huh? They can't just be there for display, they'd be out of business. So there's a lot of books on Buddhism, and there's a lot more reliable books on Buddhism now than there were when I started to look at this at the age of 16. There were some there was books that were really not very helpful and really actually were wrong. And especially in Tibetan Buddhism was made to seem like sort of the late night vampire movie or something with sex. It's good for the movie, but it doesn't tell you much about what Buddhism is all about. There are some really reliable books now. In regard to Tibetan Buddhism, I would say there's so many now, it would be an entire lecture to list them all, but anything by the Dalai Lama is always reliable, and he has a lot of books out, and anything by that is much more reliable than all these freaky things about sex in the snow-capped mountains and whatever. So one can find a number of reliable books. Of course, I have to mention my own, The Vision of Buddhism. I mention that because when I was trying to teach Buddhism, I was not happy with any of the introductory books that were out there. They seemed to be histories which obscured what Buddhism was all about by getting too much into the names and dates. And Buddhism has been to so many different parts of the world that every time it goes to a new part of the world, you get a new history, a new language, a new list of names and dates, and then where is the Buddhism in all of this? So I tried to write a book which focuses on the experience or vision of the Buddha or of Buddhism, and then puts the cultural variations at a second level. And I'm quite serious when I say, if you want an introduction to Buddhism, you have a choice between my book or one of the other books. because most of the others are very much the same. I mean, year after year, these things come out, and I look at them and I think, yeah, well, it's sort of like dog food, you know. On the wrapper, looks different, open it up, same stuff. So if your local bookstore doesn't have it, it can get it. It's also on the web. Amazon.com has it, and Paragon House has its own website. And you don't need to read the book in order, because Buddhism is not like that. My principal teacher of Buddhism at University of Wisconsin, Richard Robinson, said one learns Buddhism by the parachute drop method. You sort of drop into it and you start there. There's no really obvious place at which to start. You start for everybody. You start where you are, and that's the best place to begin. So you can, if you read my book, you can open it anywhere and see, well, this might be interesting, I'll read this chapter, and then they all can connect up. The other way that you can do it after you've got an introduction and a vague idea of what Buddhism is all about, you can get one of the more advanced texts written by somebody in a tradition that you feel comfortable with. I mean, all of the forms are now out in print, and in the Bay Area, as far as I know, every version, every lineage of the Buddhist tradition has some representative, and normally a good one. So you don't need to go to strange parts of the world and get dysentery to learn Buddhism or drink a Tibetan tea or whatever. You can do it right here in the Bay Area, ladies and gentlemen. Somewhere you will find the center or the teacher that you find is helpful to you. And listening to a live teacher is the most effective way to learn Buddhism. It's the more traditional way than reading from a book. Reading from a book, I think, probably comes from coming out of the Christian, Jewish, or Muslim tradition, where there's a sacred book as the locus of revelation. In the Buddhist tradition, there are lots of books. I mean, lots of books. I mean, it's just nobody's read all of the scriptures of Buddhism, but they do. They are supposed to be these recommendations for the person to improve themselves, to relieve their own suffering and relieve the sufferings of others, and if they work, that individual will be better. And so what you do is look around for a teacher whom you think is doing very well, a teacher, and you think he or she seems to have it together, and I'd like what they've got. They seem to have something, I'd like to get that. So they become, in fact, the book. And it's a living book, it's a book that you can relate to, and you can see that it works. It's not just a fantasy. But books are still very useful, and as I say, there's a lot of them, and obviously Buddhist monks and nuns spend a lot of time studying them and sometimes memorizing them. And I would recommend that there's an approach to the sacred texts which we can take from, if you'll pardon the expression, the Christian tradition. There is a practice in the Christian monastic tradition of the Benedictines called Lectio Divina, which we could translate as spiritual reading. And in this kind of reading, you don't read as much as you can in the time allotted, but in a sense as little as you need in the time allotted. You read along until something hits you. And you think, oh, it sounds as if this passage was written for me. The person who wrote it didn't know that, but it hits you like, oh yes, this is written for me. And then you stop reading, and you allow yourself to contemplate or meditate on that, or to get some insight into that. in the Christian tradition, this is officially known as rumination. And Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, who lived in the days when everyone lived on a farm, so it was a natural image, said the monk or anyone who's reading the Bible in his case, he chews or ruminates on the cud of the Word of God and gives forth the milk of spiritual counsel. So you read along and you get something, you allow it to affect you, and then you see how this will help you to practice in your daily life. And that, of course, is simply that is the way that the great teachers whom we find around and respect have got to where they have got by incorporating these elements. And so they have ruminated like the cow. The cow gives ordinary milk, and then the person who is ruminating on the Dharma gives the milk of spiritual counsel or of their own take on the Dharma. So then the final one then is meditation, which we've been moving to by the reading and listening to the Dharma, has also moved us into the space of meditation, or as I put it, mind training. The principal objective in Buddhist mind training is the stabilization of the mind and the use of the stabilized mind to gain insight into the nature of reality as it truly is, not reality as we have presumed it to be up to this point. And the usefulness of this is that as soon as we start to try to stabilize our mind, if it's the first time or we haven't been doing it for long, we find that we can't do it, that our mind is everywhere at once. And we're thinking of so many things we have to do, and the past, the present, and the future, and the mind is unable to come home, as it's sometimes been said. The mind will not come into the present moment of the body. This is why in meditation a lot of emphasis is put on the position of the body. If the attempt is to place the body in a state of relaxed alertness, to encourage the mind to come into a state of relaxed alertness, and to encourage the mind to come into the present moment. Because the mind can be anywhere. It can be past, present, future, fantasy. It's like Disneyland or Disney World, I think. I went many years ago. I went down to Anaheim and I went into Disneyland. Someone said, "Oh, you've got to see Disneyland." Oh, okay. And I took one picture, and that's as you go in. There's an archway. As you go in, there's a sign saying, "You are now leaving the world of today and entering the world of yesterday, tomorrow, and fantasy." I thought, that's what's wrong. We're always in those worlds. What we need to do is leave the world of yesterday, tomorrow, and fantasy and enter the world of today. So that's why Disney is wrong. The body has no choice but to be in the present moment. It doesn't have the ability, at least for most of us, to travel in time. It has to be in the present moment. So if we become aware of the body, then the mind will naturally come into the present moment, and eventually it will slow down. When you give it nothing to do, it will eventually get bored and say, "Okay, well, here we are. what happens next? You know, as the young man, as the young Zen monk said to the older Zen monk, what happens next? And the older monk says, nothing happens next. This is it. That's true. This is it. So when the mind stabilizes, it then clears up. The unstable mind, the fickle mind, is compared to a pond that has been stirred up by the wind and the mud has stirred up. And then when it calms down, it reflects whatever is going on. The traditional thing is it reflects the moon, the full moon, so well that you'd think that the moon was in the water. It's such a clear reflection. So that when the mind calms down, and please notice that it calms down, you can't, if you come at a pond that's got a lot of ripples and mud in it, you don't help it to calm down by trying to hit the waves and calm it down. That makes it worse. You allow it to calm down, and then the mind will be truly in accord with reality. The mind will then be able to focus on an aspect of reality and investigate it for what it is. For instance, we know that things are impermanent, but we probably don't feel that they are. So when we have a fairly clear mind, we can use something simple like the breath to figure out that things are impermanent. The breath has at least two very useful functions. Well, first of all, we're all doing it if we are alive, but we're not aware of it most of the time unless we have something wrong with us. We have a cold or something. So by using the breath, we can calm the mind and become aware of the present moment, and then we can switch to the insight mode, keeping the mind stable, and observe the breath, and observe that every breath is different. That we never take the same breath in exactly the same way twice, and yet they're not entirely different. There is some kind of continuity between them. And so by observation and by analysis of such a simple thing as breathing, we can come to a fairly profound realization of the nature of reality as one thing happening after another interdependently with causes and conditions, where never quite the same thing happens, but it's not entirely random. There is a kind of prediction. There are many other forms of meditation than just sitting and watching the breath. Some of them are quite elaborate, involving the use of complicated visualizations, and some of them involve the use of sound, chanting, and they spill over into worship, which is also a form of meditation. But the essence of it all is stabilizing the mind, focusing it on the present moment, gaining insight into reality, which we have learnt about in our study, and then being able, by internalizing this, to go out and to practice this in our daily lives. And that is Buddhism in a nutshell. So we have a few moments left, I think, for any questions you might have. Yes, Rolf.
I just want to get into the sexual part and say, what is right conduct when it comes to sex?
Well, I would refer you back to the, this is something which I think can take a long time. I would refer you back to the article I wrote in the newsletter some time ago. There are the precept as it stands is rather vague. It simply says, it uses the word mitya, which means false or deceitful or wrong or something, or misuse of sensuality. The word literally doesn't use the word sex as such, but sensuality, but we all know what that means. And then it is given various interpretations by different teachers and different lineages. And I don't find any of them terribly helpful for understanding how we can understand the precept if we are not. Most of the precepts in regard to sex are directed at monks who aren't supposed to have any sex, and it goes on at great length about what they shouldn't have. There are good reasons for that, but I needn't go into them right now. But if one is not a monk or nun, and especially if one is gay, so you can't say, well, it's all about producing babies, what do we do? And the suggestion that I have in that article is that sex in the human realm is about relationship, and we should ask ourselves whether this sexual relationship is helpful or unhelpful, or skillful or unskillful in regard to developing a relationship. Yeah.
Talking about words, in reading books about the Theravada tradition, they use aversion quite often, and I have always sort of taken it to mean avoidance or repugnance or something like that, maybe some combination of fear and anger. But I keep reading the word, and it seems to have so many subtle and various meanings and implications. Could you help me out to straighten up aversion and what exactly the Theravada writers mean by that?
Yes, well, I'd have to see which text that was in and what they translate, because I say there's no standard translation. But what I think is going on is at that level, they are speaking of the precepts in the negative. And when we come to the practice of the precepts, we start with the negative because we've been practicing for so many incarnations the wrong way to do it. So the first thing to do is to stop doing it that way and then to do it another way. So, for instance, the precept not to harm is put in the negative, not to harm. But then, when we get on to another level of the Brahma Viharas, the pure abidings, it speaks of compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity and friendliness. So they're more positive ways of looking at things. But I think what's happening is that if what we've been doing is drinking poison, we should have aversion to the drinking of the poison, first of all, and then try to find something that would be healthy.
I'd like to hear more about, since this is daily life, I'd like to hear more about anger, because as I live here longer, I think, absorb the Bay Area precept of never expressing anger.
Oh,
which
yes.
means
Yes.
We hang out in different circles.
I tend to break off relationships instead of express anger, because I have this sort of super ego that says never under any circumstances
Yes.
express anger. And it somehow dovetails at least with Bay Area Buddhism that you shouldn't express anger.
Well, I think maybe Clint is right, actually, Bill, that you maybe hang out in different circles with all of this. But yes, the idea that you should never be angry at anything it is kind of a New Age thing. It's maybe going too far, I think, to the idea of there's hate and then there's love, and because when you have a hateful situation, it's uncomfortable. So then maybe people go too far the other way and say You can tear my arm off and beat me with the soggy end, and I'll just say, oh, it doesn't matter, everything is all right. That's okay. I think that the distinction really is not that there should be no anger, but that there shouldn't be inappropriate kinds of anger. The kind of anger that comes from fear that I'm going to be I'm going to be made to look ridiculous, or that therefore my ego will be hurt, is not an appropriate kind of anger, but the kind of anger that would say, if someone goes into a McDonald's and shoots everybody and kills children and whatever, we couldn't say, oh, well, that's okay. That one should have anger at that, but then the anger is directed at the action. That is an inappropriate action, and it brings more suffering. The person probably is doing it under the illusion that they're getting some happiness, but we can't excuse them for that. We must stop them from that. If we can possibly do, we must stop them from that, because they're unable to stop themselves, apparently. So I think the difference really is between, once again, if you pardon me, bringing something in from the Christian tradition, there is the notion of hate the sin, but not the sinner. That is to say, your actions are unskillful and are bringing suffering, but for you yourself I will have compassion and find the best way that I can to love you, even though you are doing these things. But still that doesn't mean I let you do anything. It may mean that we have to lock you up, and we may even, if the law is that you have to be executed, we may have to do that.
We really should close now.
Yes. Okay.
We take more questions at tea time.
Okay.
Anybody have an announcement?
Actually, I have one announcement that I'm helping to do the organization of the retreat this year. I'm trying to get the program done. Kay, who I thought was here, is helping with the registration. But we've got this far. I have a commitment from Jim Wilson to be the teacher. Again, I was hoping he would, and he says he will do it. And he wants to talk on the Lotus Sutra. He says that'll give us lots of leeway. There's lots of stuff in the Lotus Sutra. So that's my announcement. Thank you.
And when is it?
When is it? September? Is it? No. Is it the day after Labor Day?
First weekend following Labor Day.
First, okay.
Friday, late afternoon through Sunday, late afternoon.
And it's in the same place before at Vajrapani in Boulder Creek.
And a reminder that talks are available on the internet at the GBF website, gaybuddhist.org.
I'm the host for today, and so I brought some snacks to eat to go with your tea and social hour here afterward. Be sure to wash your cups if you use teacups. Just rinse them out and put them on the rack when you finish. There's the Donna Bowl also, so please make a contribution. We like to have ask for a suggested donation of $5.
Or more.
A few people go to brunch afterwards also, so you might check around for people who are going to go out to eat afterwards. And if you have any questions, you can talk to me.
Who's here for the first time?
Who's here for the first time?
First-timers?
Yes.
Yes, actually, I'm Bruein. I'm from Thailand. I'm really interested in Buddhism. I was a monk in Temple Forest monk for a couple months, and I met Professor Roger in DC, and he invited me to be here, and I appreciate to be here too. Thanks for
transforming problems into happiness. The Lama Zopa Rinpoche, Chapter 7 is particularly good. If anyone would like it, I'd be happy to pass it on right this moment. I'll leave it on the counter. Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next Sunday, many of you may know already, is a scheduled peace march. I don't know if it conflicts with something that's going on here at the same time. Also, Richard was our host today. He outlined what host to. I'm trolling for a volunteer to be a host. It's 6 times a year. If anybody's interested or willing or has some questions and willing to do that, talk to me afterwards.
Anything else? Roger, any close for us,
Yeah.
please?
May all beings be separated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all beings be joined to happiness and the causes of happiness. May all beings dwell in equanimity with those who are near and those who are far. May all beings find peace, joy, and freedom. Namamida Butsu, Namamida Butsu, Namamida Butsu. I thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.